Howdy, folks. Guess who's back? That's right, it's the two Maesters. Oh my god, what's that you hear? Sauron is Halbrand! Ah! Spoilers. Lol, joke. Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way, Josh. How you doing?
Oh, I'm good, thanks. And like you bringing the biggest spoiler from the TV series right at the beginning of the episode. So anyone who comes in is, oh, Rings of Power. I've heard good things. Mixed reviews. Oh, a big spoiler right at the beginning.
Oh, I know. I don't care. So you know, we are two Maesters. We normally talk about House of the Dragon, as our fantastic audience knows. But as they may also know in their infinite wisdom, is that House of Dragon Season 1 is over.
Yep.
So now we're going to talk about something we've never, ever spoken about before on Two Maesters. Rings of Power. Yeah.
Not at all, yeah. We should have spoken about it more, especially the fact that both were coming out and both were streaming at the same time. But yeah,
how did
just
we...
too focused.
Yeah.
We're just too focused on House of the Dragon.
I know. How did we not end up talking about that, Marvel, the gaming industry?
I know.
This goes beyond me. And you know, we have spoken about Rings of Power before. So, the aim of this episode is like a special, to give it the attention it deserves and maybe slate it a little. We'll see. And, from now on, what Two Maesters are going for, we're going to do specials for each sort of universe out there. So we're doing Rings of Power. We've done House of the Dragon. We're going to do The Witcher at some point. I'd like to do Dune. Perhaps we could do some Star Wars stuff as well. Like, there's plenty we could delve into. But yeah, Rings of Power. First things first, as I've shouted out the spoiler.
Yeah.
What did you think of the first episode? Oh my god.
The first episode, I think the issue with the first episode with Rings of Power is that it set the tone just way too much. Like, they put like a lot of information all into one episode. And I think some TV shows, what they've done is that they kind of have like a prequel, like just before they release a TV series, maybe on like YouTube or maybe as like a short on a streaming service. They say, okay, then this is the thing that's going to set up the whole world so for example, this is going to set up the whole Rings of Power world, so someone can watch that, and then when they then dive into episode 1, it's more focusing on the action than less of like trying to build the story. Because like, for example, when you've got I've completely forgotten what her name is, Galadriel, when she's like climbing the ice and she's in that ice region, like, for someone who isn't really in tone and doesn't fully understand like the Lord of the Rings universe, they're like, what the hell are they? Why are the elves here? Like, why are they climbing this ice region? And like, and it's also like, I think another thing is like, it's hard to keep track of like names and like places.
Yeah, just like with the first Game of Thrones series.
And I think like, if someone isn't like a major like Lord of the Rings fan and has read some of the other books, not just Lord of the Rings, like this, I'm probably saying this wrong, the Silver
Silmarillion or something?
The Silmarillions, yeah. Or the Children of Hurin, I think that's, we'll get Jeffrey to put this at the bottom, but if a person hasn't done that or haven't read any of those or watched stuff like on YouTube to explain like the whole universe, it's hard to like fully understand it. Because I think one thing that Tolkien has done, which is amazing, is like he's made this huge expansive universe which is large, but then I think it's hard to like fully like explain it simplistically. Like, one thing I could say about George R. R. Martin is that he's made a vast world, but he's put it in a way where you can talk about it like simplistically. Like, you could literally talk about the world of Ice and Fire, and you can talk about it maybe in a 5-minute conversation explaining
all the continents and stuff. But
then but with Lord of the Rings, it's hard to do so because it's like really extremely high fantasy. Like,
yeah, it's quite complicated. I watched a YouTube video where they just gave the entire history of the Lord of the Rings universe. From like, even because you got the first 3 ages, and then you've got the Age of Trees or something, some bull crap like that. No offense, JR Tolkien, but like literally this guy did a map and showing you, but it's really hard to like picture it all because like they travel. It's like the land of the elves was at Valinor. Like it's
Yeah.
not somewhere that can traditionally. It looks like it's on the end of the ocean, but to reach it, it's like you travel to another plane or something. It's like you use magic. And then Numenor in the shape of Middle Earth. I've got to admit, I think with Game of Thrones, I'm probably going to say this a lot. I prefer the map in that because it's a lot more character to it.
Yeah, and I think the way he's done the map, the way that George R. R. Martin has done the map is that
What, in Game of Thrones?
in Game of Thrones is that the way he's done it is that you've like fully, for the whole Game of Thrones series, you've fully focused on basically Westeros. And then later, bit by bit, they show you parts of Essos, bit by bit. But then, like, to your point, with everything to do with Lord of the Rings, you've got Middle Earth, and then you've got like where the elves are from. You've got Numenor, which aren't a part of Middle Earth.
Yeah, that's the big island.
And I think it's just, as I said before, like really high fantasy. So it takes like a lot of concentration, like learning,
Conversation,
like you've got like the Maiar and the Valar as well, which are part of the Lord of the Rings universe.
They're like gods or something.
Yeah, so you've got Iluvatar, who is the overall god. Then you've got the Malar, who are basically like his lieutenants, and then you've got like the Valar, who are under them.
Yeah,
and then it's a really, knowing that is a key part of like the TV series, and like they don't really explain it beforehand. So like
even in Lord of the Rings, I don't think, did they really explain it in Lord of the Rings?
No, and I think that's kind of the thing, because it's such like an expansive universe that you really could have made the Lord of the Rings books into TV series. Like, I was just reading, my sister's read the books, and she said that a lot of the stuff in like the films has been taken out just because there's so much stuff in the books. Like even like The Hobbit, they could technically have squeezed it into a single film.
Not for $10 million. They made some money.
but yeah, and I think like the show gets better and better each episode. Like the first 2 episodes is like the setting of the scene, and then the action really starts to build up from episode 3 and 4.
And then when you see the orcs as well.
And I think one of the things I have to say is that they've done extremely well is the visual effects, the settings of the places, and I would say also the makeup of the orcs as well.
Makeup
is really done, and the costumes as well.
Fantastic.
Is amazing.
Yeah, honestly, like I think they've really aced that. Like the visual, everything you said, it looks beautiful. I remember some of the reviews when the first 2 episodes of Rings of Power got released. They said looks amazing but disappointing and slow. And to be honest, I thought that was a bit unfair because the first few episodes of any new series are going to have to set the scene. Like Andor, they released 3 episodes at once, because if you watch the first episode just by itself, nothing really happens. They just introduce everything, and Rings of Power. Why do you think they released the first 2 episodes rather than just one episode?
One episode,
Yeah, because it kind of keeps the pace, because everyone knows it's the first few episodes are going to introduce stuff.
Yeah.
But, God, beautiful, yeah. And, like, the orcs, amazing. I think orcs look even better than in Lord of the Rings, except for maybe the Uruk-hai and stuff.
Yeah.
But even then, that's like, Lord of the Rings set a very high bar on those orcs. Rings of Power, I think, aced it with that. Like, wow.
Yeah. And I think, like, just talking about, like, the first 2 episodes, it's like setting, I think for, like, Game of Thrones, you only really saw the setting for a single faction in the first episode was literally everyone is in Winterfell. So everyone is in Winterfell.
All the Starks.
For the first episode. So all the Starks are there.
King's Landing comes into it as well.
A bit. But then remember, like, King Robert goes to Winterfell.
Yeah.
And then brings Cersei and Jaime with him. And then Tommen, and then Joffrey's there.
Yeah, I suppose. So
it's like the main characters are all within that nexus. Mm-hmm. But then, like, with the first 2 episodes of Rings of Power, it's like they're jumping from location to location, and like if you don't know like what the locations are and the significance of those locations, it's hard to track. And I think maybe like for new fans that was hard to do. And I think that was clever with Game of Thrones, is that they just focused on one location, and like it seemed like in the first season, it's like we're not going to show everywhere, to not confuse people, we're going to focus on Winterfell, we're going to focus on the Eyrie, we're going to focus on King's Landing, and we're going to focus on wherever Daenerys is.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to focus on.
I see what you mean, because it's always a sensory overload, isn't it? And I did feel that way about Rings of Power, because I'm not too familiar with the Lord of the Rings lore. I loved Lord of the Rings when I was a kid. I thought The Hobbit was crap, the three Hobbits, but no, something just didn't really click with me with them. But Rings of Power, I thought it was good, but it was a lot to take in. There were a lot of characters, like everyone's a son of someone or a father of someone. Like Isildur's son of, what's Isildur's father called again?
Oh, I've completely forgotten.
Oh, I was supposed to be looking up a list earlier of like all the characters.
But I agree with your point. Like the names aren't easy to follow. Like at least I think that's another thing that George R. R. Martin has done. The names are easy to follow because he uses basically most of the names are either old Celtic names or names from the medieval periods based on certain cultures, or they're names of today, like Ned for Eddard. Eddard's close to Edward. Yeah. You've got Rob as well. You've got Jamie.
Yeah, that's
Brandon
true.
as well. Brandon Stark. And then I think it's...
Peter.
Yeah, Peter Baelish. And I think also because like you see kind of stuff like this in Marvel, but they've set up a universe beforehand. So like they set things up with like Iron Man and like Thor and Captain America, and they've built it up bit by bit. But as you said, it's kind of like sensory overload, that they're giving you all this information all at once, saying this is the world of prequel to Lord of the Rings, and this is everything right here, right now. And like even like the thing that they talk about at the beginning, that technically could be a season in itself. Like, when they talk about how the destruction
of Morgoth
and the destruction of the tree as well that was burnt.
Yeah.
The fact that could have been a whole season of itself, literally, because so many things happened there. So maybe they might go back to it, but it is a lot of information.
Yeah. And one thing I've been hearing a lot, but I'm just going to be clear, like my opinion of Rings of Power is I thought it was decent, but it felt a bit weak compared to especially House of the Dragon. Maybe it suffered from the juxtaposition with House of the Dragon. But one thing I reading about is a lot of people think there's inconsistencies with the wider Lord of the Rings universe. So stuff like Galadriel having a husband or something, and it being someone different to, because in Lord of the Rings Fellowship Ring you get introduced to her husband or something.
Yeah, you do.
I don't know. Do you see any inconsistencies in it?
I think another thing that people need to realize is like, imagine like, for example, I'm trying to find a really, really good example. So when Marvel does their film with Deadpool,
yeah,
and it's going to have Wolverine in it, because it's like a new company who's doing it, technically it won't link. It'll be the same like characters, but it won't link directly to what Fox has done throughout their whole building of that universe. And I think that's the issue, like that we've mentioned before, and like in previous episodes, the fact that the estate of Tolkien have said they wanted it to be like completely separate. So you kind of have the thing that you can't really. It's not heavily linked. It's like the same book, but it's like, imagine if two companies.
Well,
the company took
their own stamp on it, and this is Amazon's version of Lord of the Rings. There you go, Amazon Prime Lord of the Rings. There you go, delivered straight to your door. Yeah, and $400 million. That is a lot to spend on a TV show. Like, I think House of the Dragon was maybe 175, which was still more than Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
which I find strange because there were a lot of battle scenes in Game of Thrones, but I guess we're looking at per season rather than altogether overall. But like, I don't know if it felt like $400 million. I mean, I suppose individuals and a costume design. Like, the costume design was so exotic. Yeah. You didn't see anything that was, found in our history in real life. You look at Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. They use armor ideas from real life, like a lot of like
based on medieval armor. Yes.
Yeah, like the breastplates and stuff. They use the helmets. whilst in Rings of Power is really so exotic looking, like the Numenorians and what they wear.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought it looked pretty cool, but to be honest, online I've been watching so many critical videos because I was thinking I'm just feeling a bit too much too in favor of Rings of Power. A lot of people criticize the Numenorians' armor as looking like plastic. I mean, I think it still look cool, and it's high fantasy. Like, come on,
I
give them a
think that's
break.
another thing that people need to like take into consideration. Like concerning the armor, it is high fantasy, and it isn't based on anything that's in this world. It's like, for example, if you look at like the armor that the stormtroopers wear in Star Wars, like literally, it looks like plastic. If you really look at it.
I mean, it works like plastic. The Ewoks can kill them with a bow and arrow.
And then you're like, oh yeah, but then it's not in this. It's not set in this universe, or doesn't work in this kind of universe. And I think at times what ruins like really high fantasy, like you would technically call Star Wars high sci-fi, which where Star Trek will supposed to be like low sci-fi, because it's basically Star Trek is based on our world, but then in the future if we met aliens. But then with high fantasy, you can't use like modern logic to decide, okay, then that wouldn't really work in the real world, because it isn't really the real world. And
yeah,
it's
I see what you mean, and hence Game of Thrones is like low fantasy then compared to
it's still high fantasy, but it's a lower form, because low fantasy is something that's literally set in our world. So
right.
For example, like Arthur and the Round Table would be technically considered low fantasy, because
could you just say mythology is basically low fantasy? Arguably,
yeah. So you could say, because people say that there is historical records about that there was an Arthur, but he wasn't, and he was fighting to save England from the Saxons, and that's where the whole tales are based on. Well, for example, like Robin Hood is, you could say, is a form of low fantasy, because it's still based on this world and folklore and things. Like Nottingham is a real place, and like the people who are in it are also real people. But then, like Star Trek, probably is, as I said, as a low sci-fi. But then you can't really use the logic of governs like this world to use it on like Star Wars, or use it for like high fantasy, because it doesn't really work. And I think that's one of the things that high fantasies had an issue with. And I think like films that have been high fantasy that haven't been Lord of the Rings have kind of like suffered because of it, because fans are like, oh, but that wouldn't happen in real life. But I think you need to just accept it that it's not real life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that kind of links to, because like there's a lot of criticism about being too woke, that they're putting in a lot of characters of different origins, that why would they be there? Why would they mix? Blah, blah, blah. But this is high fantasy, though. Like the whole idea of it is to be sort of an escape from real life. I mean, I love reading fantasy and sci-fi because I guess deep down it's a form of escapism, because sometimes I want to be as far away from real life. Sometimes when I'm reading a book that's about like, it's just too real, and I would start relating it to my own life, or there's bad stuff going on in the world at the moment, and I just don't want to think about that. I want to think about elves and orcs and magic and stuff, because I want to shut off before and read a book, you know? And yeah, I could see what you mean. You know, that's high fantasy for you. And, you know, it's reflected in the stuff that people wear and the settings that you see. Like, they're just so fantastic. Like, was there a setting, like one area that you really liked in Rings of Power?
I would say it'd have to be Numenor, just because, like...
Oh my God.
I think just because the way that it's set up, the way that it's built, it kind of reminded me, I don't know why, a bit of like...
Where do you think it's based
Minas
on?
Tirith. It kind of reminded me a bit of that, and like... And I just think, like, the fact that it's completely separate, and like, if you look at everywhere else in like the TV series, so like where I would pick that, and then also where the dwarves are, like
Khazad-dûm.
The way they did the effects for that was brilliant.
I know that episode. Was it episode 3 or 2? When Celebrimbor, just Elrond manages to sweet talk his way in and get that whole scene is amazing. I really need to watch that, because the soundtrack for it as well. Like we need to talk about the soundtrack later as well. But like walks in, and they've got to bash those rocks as well. What a cool scene! What a great way to introduce you to the dwarfs. And I'm just gonna say that rock bashing scene, I love it. It's two males just bashing rocks with hammers. And I was talking to like my female flatmate, and I was like, "This is what happens when you leave boys alone in a room with toys. They just start doing dumb crap like that."
Yeah, competitions.
Yeah, exactly. Measuring contests, you know. Maybe I should beep that out. They're done.
Yeah, but I think those two places, especially because they're completely different to everywhere else, you can actually see where the money has actually been spent. And like, to those who are Dragon Age fans, and you've actually been in like Dragon Age Inquisition, and you've seen like some parts of like the deep roads which were made by dwarfs in the Dragon Age universe, it looks very similar to what they did in like Rings of Power. And I think that the way that they do it is that they make it like, so I think sometimes when you've got dwarfs and you've got like their underground living, they put it in a situation like, oh, they're just surviving. But the way that they built it was like, no, they're thriving, and they've literally got a huge city underground.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's the reason I did really like the setting, is that they are like very, very rich, and therefore they're going to expand out. They're going to have roads there. They're going to have like a huge ceiling to let the sunlight in as well.
Yeah, that's true. You know, and it's their habitat really. Like the elves' habitat tends to be places of beauty. In Rings of Power, it tends to be places of beauty. Like you look at, was it Linden?
Yeah, Linden,
which is
yeah.
just London.
Yeah.
Was that J.R. Tolkien's? Like, did he come up with that?
I believe so, yeah.
Well, I wonder where he got the inspiration for that one from. And then, the humans, it's interesting because you've got Numenor, which is, it actually feels glorious. Like, you look at they worship the sun. You look at the Queen of Numenor's the headwear she wears, it looks like a blazing sun.
Yeah.
You see that in the weather, the way they sail around, glorious. And then the Southlands.
And also the love of blue, like how much of their society is based on blue. The Queen wears blue. Yeah. They've got blue on their sails.
They worship the sea as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting that they worship the sea, although not as cool as the Iron Man who worship the sea in Game of Thrones. Like, what is dead may never die.
Yeah, the drowned god.
Yeah, the drowned god. So cool. But yeah, then you got the Southlands, which is quite frankly, like it used to be Morgoth's territory. The elves came in, deposed the evil dictator Morgoth because he had weapons of mass destruction, which he didn't end up having. And then now the locals were like, I really like the dynamic of how some of the humans, you know, because the humans sided with Morgoth in the battle that supposedly preceded Rings of Power. And I like how there's still simmering tension there, especially, you know, in the first few episodes when, what's his name? The really hot elf.
Yeah.
Arondir, that's it. Hot Spice.
It's just quickly there. It's like every time like I see like videos, they're like, oh yeah, and you know the hot elf. I'm like, everyone calls him that. It's like, that's his nickname. Basically, they should put in the credits.
The buff
also.
elf. Please put that in brackets. That would help us out so much. Actually, whilst you've said that, actually, I saw a funny post on the internet the other day of someone saying like, I have to keep telling my kids that these are elves, saying that about the elves and Rings of Power, whilst these, pointing to the Targaryens, House Dragon, are not elves. Like,
yeah, because they do look like elves, actually.
Yeah, they do. Like, very fair hair, very like naturally beautiful looking. But you know, I'm not sure. I kind of like how the elves look in this, because I was never too fussed about the long hair thing, but they just don't really look like elves, to be honest.
And I think people also need to remember there's different tribes of elves. So you've got like, even in like Lord of the Rings, you do see like the elves that Galadriel with in The Hobbit specifically is different from the elves that they then meet later on that take them captive, take the hobbits captive.
Yeah.
So those are the wood elves. So then you've got like different groups of elves, and that I think they did branch out when they arrived to Middle Earth.
Right.
So you've got different. So I think that they will look different and act different because they're not all the same, and it kind of like brings stuff like to like Elder Scrolls, where you've got different types of like elves in. And I think you kind of have the same thing. And I think just in most fantasy, everyone thinks elves are all the same. They all act the same. They're all vegetarians. They all love vegetables. But then if you think about it, that in Lord of the Rings, there are different types of elves.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Like, to your point, it's like...
Different types of humans as well.
Yeah. And like, to your point, it's like, you kind of have that feel, which I did like about the show, that the humans, like... They were like, "Oh yeah, thanks for coming to liberate us, but really, f off. We've had enough of you.
Yeah.
The war's over. You should head back to where you came from, literally." And it's weird because you do see stuff like that in real life. Like, "Oh, thanks for the liberation, folks, but why are you still here? Head off somewhere." But then it's like, "Wait, no, come back. Things are actually pretty bad. Why don't you lot stay for a bit and help us out?" And I think the thing that I did like about it was that there are tensions between humans and elves.
Yeah.
And they've always been, because my sister was telling me that the elves kind of like dislike humans because the creator, Iluvatar, basically, humans are his favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And basically they're a bit upset about that. And you also have the fact that humans are also distrustful of elves, because elves always walk in and act high and mighty, like, because we live so long, we know the best, and we know the best solution for everything.
I know, I do like that, because they show friction between the different. First of all, like, let's call factions, because there's different factions within elves, but between, I guess, the races, or the races of it, because you've got the dwarfs, the elves, the humans. No, between the elves and the dwarfs as well, you see the like politicking there and the mistrust, and how none of them are willing to really put alive of one of their own people, sacrifice their own people's lives to save the elves, for example.
Yeah,
that was quite cool. I thought that kind of struck a chord, because it makes me think of social Darwinism, and you see J.R. Tolkien's sort of influence, I guess, because he was, he fought through 2 world wars, so he thinks of these races acting in the way that nations were acting in World War II and One, like very patriotic and not choosing to sacrifice themselves for the other. Yeah,
and like you even kind of like see it throughout the series as like, even if there is an evil, are we going to really? You see it in Lord of the Rings as well, and I think you definitely see it in Game of Thrones that. We know that there's an evil, but why should we sacrifice ourselves?
Just like NATO.
So why can't you just do it all by yourself and leave us to the side? And like, why should we team up with you to take this person down? And then I really, really like the fact that later on in the series that you then get reminded the fact that orcs are basically elves who have just been like corrupted and tortured and have been transformed into orcs. And like, I think that's a key thing that people forget. And it's just weird that an elf can actually turn into like an orc. And it's just like, how much suffering Morgoth must have made the elves suffer to be basically to turn out to be like orcs.
And they kind of reflect that in the costumes as well, because some of the orcs look like they're wearing sort of like elven garments, which they could have just looted from, dead elves. But still, you could see the roots there.
And I think orcs hate elves more than they hate humans.
I think so. It seems like they're mortal enemies, whilst humans could kind of cooperate with orcs, kind of like that old man who goes and joins the Adar and his orcs, with the blood sacrifice.
Yeah, and I think another thing, I think I raised it in like another episode, that Morgoth was a bit of like a bastard. Like really, he was like really upset with the way that the world was, and the fact that he wanted to bring everything down and to destroy everything, and to just basically realizing that everything had been made by Iluvatar, wanted to destroy everything, while Sauron wants to control everything. And you kind of see that in like Lord of the Rings, that he's got like people, he's got humans working for him, he's got Saruman working for him as well. And I think that you kind of see it, especially with Adar, that they didn't really like working with Morgoth. It's just that he was just so dominating that they had to work for him. And you can kind of see that with Adar, that he just wants a place for his people.
Yeah, exactly. I've got to say, like, in terms of like favorite characters, I think Adar, Lord Father, he's so cool. Really emo, but I loved him. I thought he was a really cool character. Great actor playing him as well. And I never even knew there were dark elves in the Lord of the Rings universe. I think that's quite cool, actually. And the story behind them is they're tortured and taken by Morgoth. Who would you say is your favorite character?
My favorite character. I'd have to say that Isildur is my favorite character.
Really? Why?
I think it's just the fact that for me it's just the fact that he has like, I think it's more like on a comedic side, the fact that he's literally doesn't know what he wants to do with his life, and literally is like tearing down everyone around, like what he did with his friends.
Yeah,
and literally he caused them to then be kicked off the what do they call it again?
The expedition.
The expedition and off a ship. So therefore they then join the battle. And I think it's also just partly down to the fact that I know what's going to happen later on. That I think he's one of my favorite characters.
Right.
And I think just that they can really build his character up, especially in the next few seasons.
I'd be keen to see it. I don't know. I found him a little bit annoying, to be honest. It just seemed like pretty boy issues, you know.
Yeah.
God, I'm just so handsome, but I don't know what to do with my life. Oh my God. His daddy, though. His daddy was cool. What was his name again? I've got the list here. His name was... What was it? Elendil.
Yeah, because
he was
they said
cool.
that,
He was very
his
cool.
name basically means friends to the elves.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ah, I see. Yeah, I thought Elendil was well cool. Really cool, really funny. Great beard as well. Great facial hair. You know, fairly cool long hair. Just all around, what a top dad. That is the definition of a cool, neat dad right there.
I would also say my second favorite would then be Durin.
Oh, yeah. Wait, which one? Durin the daddy or Durin?
Junior. Durin Junior.
Durin Junior. Yeah, he was cool. What was the saying? Enough. Give me the meat and give it to me raw. Oh, me and my friends were memeing. Like the memes coming out of that line were amazing. We were using that so much. Like, yeah, it was cool.
Yeah.
I thought the bromance between Elrond and Durin just never really felt like anything real. I don't know. It just didn't feel natural.
But it could be the fact that it could be that if they are playing it cleverly, that it's because of their two races, that their two races are different. So they do have a bond, but then it somehow can't break the fact that one's a dwarf and one's an elf. But I think it's more down to like, you didn't really feel the bromance like you do in like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, between
with
Frodo
Legolas
and Sam, or Legolas and Gimli.
Yes.
Yeah.
You actually see like the bromance between them. And I think that one thing I did like about the dwarfs is that it gave us like a real picture of how the dwarfs are, because we've never actually, because like, even in The Hobbit, it's like, no, they've been exiled from their home. We don't actually get to see them, what it means to be like a dwarf.
Oh, actually see them in
their habitat,
in their home, yeah.
And like in Lord of the Rings, you only really see Gimli as a dwarf throughout the whole saga. It's just Gimli is the only dwarf that you see. So
That's
then
true.
being able to like see the the dwarfs in their natural setting,
in their kingdom and all its greatness, like when they just go Khazad-dûm.
Yes.
Oh yeah, so cool. Like, and the soundtrack for that, we got to talk about the soundtracks now. Like, Khazad-dûm is a tune, but also Halbrand. Like, it's usually the track that plays when you see Halbrand.
Yeah.
It's funny how they call it Halbrand, and then it's actually Sauron's track. But I really like that. The soundtrack was good. And, you know, there's a lot of moments where two characters have deep, meaningful conversation. They play really well, like emotive music. I've got to say, though, it got a bit tiring having those one-on-one emotive scenes in it. Yeah. Like between Isildur and Elendil, his father, or Galadriel saying something deep about trying to motivate people or something, or like, darkness, it waits. Like, what was the speech in the first one, which is like, darkness doesn't, it waits for us in our complacency, and at the right moment, it strikes. Like, cool, some cool things, but it just got a bit tiring. Emotional one-on-one, and then emotional music, although the soundtrack was good. I mean, what did you think of the soundtrack?
I would say it's really, really, really good. And I think it did kind of like pick up from the one thing I can say about The Hobbit is that it did have a good soundtrack. And also Lord of the Rings has a good soundtrack. And I think especially when it like depicts, like when the scene is about to go bad and then you just hear the music, and then things go bad. And like one of the things I did love about Lord of the Rings is like, you know, the tune that they always play with the orcs.
Yeah,
like,
savage.
Dun, 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 dun. Like every time you hear that music, you're just thinking to yourself, yeah, the orcs are literally going to rush in. And I think they did
savage.
have that.
It adds to the atmosphere,
yes,
doesn't it?
It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. And then, you know, the elves, it's always like, oh. And then the ring wraiths, like a stab in the dark. Oh, sorry, a knife in the dark. If you don't know what song that is from Lord of the Rings soundtrack, Howard Shore is the one who did the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. Listen to A Knife in the Dark. That is the dun dun. Like
yeah.
Amazing. The dread it builds up when the ring wraiths are chasing after is it Eowyn in it? Wow. And you know, I felt like they had that here. Like, you know, the orcs, like for example, when they're chanting Nam Pat, like all that stuff. That was cool. Really cool. And you know, there were some moments, and that's why I think really, it's kind of like with Star Wars. You know, Star Wars. I remember reading Wikipedia once, and it said Star Wars was a space opera, and I was like, well, it kind of is, because the soundtrack is so important, and it's there's a lot of choruses, like a lot of choirs singing it. Lord of the Rings is the same. I think that's what gives it that epicness, having that great soundtrack. And Rings of Power, I think they caught on with that quite well. Maybe I'd say even more so than House of the Dragon, because whilst House of the Dragon, the soundtrack was good, it felt mainly like they were just replaying the Game of Thrones soundtrack, which, don't get me wrong, was perfectly fine. In the intro, they were doing it as well. Like, great, give me more of that. But there was nothing new. Whilst Rings of Power, like, holy cow, loved it.
Yeah, and it's like they use the music to not just set the setting of where the location was, to give you like more of a feel of it, but also to set the tone of like the dialogue and also the situation you're going into. And like, I think another thing I did like about the series is that you also get like a picture into like what it means to like be an orc, that you never get to see like in Lord of the Rings or in The Hobbit, because they're always
not being able to go out in the sun, for example.
And like, what do they do if they're not being driven by a Dark Lord? Like, the fact that literally you get to see from their perspective, like, they used to be elves that were tortured into this creation which they are, which they have no choice, or they had no choice in what they became, but now they are seen as like the bane of existence of all other living creatures within the Middle Earth. And the fact that some of them just want to have like some form of place to call a home.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, you see Adar's love for them, which is unusual. Like, he actually cries when one of the orcs die, or like kind of cries. He looks very tearful and sad and mournful.
Yeah.
You kind of like, that's why I think he's a cool character, because he's the first evil lord to actually show any love for the orcs, or any character to show love for the orcs.
Yeah.
Like, what are some good orcs out there? Well, I mean, I don't think there's ever been, but
good orcs, because they've been tortured into. But
yeah, fair.
But I agree with you. Like, if you think about it, the two other, like even the three other bad guys in the films, either The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, it's like they couldn't give a damn about the orcs whatsoever. Like Saruman couldn't give a toss about any of the orcs that died.
They don't treat them
neither did Sauron. And like, even I would say like Smaug just, I think all of the villains, like the three major ones, is just cared about themselves. But I think it was refreshing to see like a villain who you could kind of understand him. And I think you can never really understand any other of the villains in Lord of the Rings, but you kind of can understand like where Adira is coming from.
Yeah, and he's such cool emo vibes like that. You know, you kind of felt when he's speaking, it felt like he was in pain. You know, like that's why I thought the acting was coming out really well there. Like he was suffering on the inside as well, just because of what he's been tortured. Yeah, that was very cool. And you know, the whole thing of like, this is the founding of Mordor. Spoilers. You know, with the Southlands and the volcano. Really cool. That totally took me by surprise. I totally forgot they were digging those trenches in the first place, to be honest. Up until episode 4 when the hot elf, I'm just going to call him that, gets out.
Yeah.
That was a cool surprise. I was like, oh my God, they founded Mordor. Like that, was it episode 6? Was it?
So, yeah.
Wow. What an episode. Like by far the best episode in the entire series. Like that was fantastic. Great fight scene. and just all round, like, it had me on the edge of my seat the whole way through. Like, one moment it looks like the humans have won, and they realize they killed their own people. Then the orcs attack. Then it looks like all's going to hell. It looks like the hot elf's going to get some sort of dagger in his eye, and he doesn't. And then they look like they're fine. And then the Numenor comes, and everything looks good. Everyone's celebrating, like, strength for the king. They don't realize it's Sauron. Lol. Sour brand. And then the volcano erupts, and they lose. And wow, so cool.
Yeah, and it's so like Lord of the Rings. Like, when there is no hope left, then hope then arrives with the Numenorians. And
were you quoting Bronwyn there? That was actually, I loved that. That was a good one-on-one cheesy moment with sad music. That was cool. That's it.
Yeah, and I think also, like, to your point, like, the fact that they let as we quoted, the hot elf go as well. Like, you would never think that orcs would let a person go, because if just going through all the things that we know about orcs is like, no, orcs kill, they take prisoners, enslave, and just kill. The fact they just let him go to just deliver a message.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit of a silly plot point. Like,
but it could show that they're trying to change their intentions of who they are. And I think another thing that was very clever is, you know, when they sent the humans in first, like, that is such a clever move to do. Like,
that's such an orcish move.
That is
exactly. They play dirty, don't they? They do play dirty. Like, for example, in Return of the King, they start flinging over the heads of the prisoners, like, release the prisoners, and just flinging over heads of dead men and stuff. Like, that's very orcish, because I think what I like about the orcs in some ways, they're kind of a reflection of the darker bits of humanity, like the call to industry and the will of power over nature.
That is what Tolkien put in for the orcs. Like, anything like about infrastructure, industry is linked to the orcs, especially the fact that you see
destruction of nature.
Yeah, you see it in the Two Towers, the second film. Literally, they are destroying so much of this woodlands to basically create weapons to then feed and use for the army of the orcs, especially the Uruk-hai, which are then being sent against Helm's Deep. And then he was like, just reading some of the stuff that he was saying, is that he also saw, like, growing up, like, you'd have these village towns, like, literally, like, go from, like, these green towns to then bring in factories, bring in industry, and literally these green spaces that you would love to see and would be just wiped out with factories, which we know now, like, producing so much pollution and smog that was affecting people's lives back then. Yeah,
exactly. That's influence from J.R. Tolkien. It's kind of really cool to see that, because he's showing, like, some of the darkness that he sees in the world, and, you know, some of the evil things the orcs do, like throwing prisoners of war's heads over walls to terrify people, because that's what humans used to do. Like, Mongolians used to do that. Pretty badass. And the one thing I've really got to point out as well, because I watched this in a video as well earlier, and I've spoken to you about it before, but, you know, so episode 6, really cool, Mordor gets founded, but, you know, they don't say its name. Episode 7, there's a scene where Adol's, like, talking to the orcs, they're standing next to the volcano, like, the orcs are like, finally, we have a home in the Southlands, and Adol's like, no, it won't be called the Southlands anymore. We shall need a new name for it. And he turns and has this brooding look at Mount Doom. And it's like they had to show on the screen in, like, really tacky font, Southlands. And then it burns away in, like, some terrible, like, PowerPoint style transition to Mordor and, like, a new font. It really tacky. And I even found a few news articles that are saying, like, they felt like they're treating the audience like idiots. It was kind of like, we know, okay, what that place will be. Like, didn't have to spell it out for us.
Yeah, and I think one thing that they could do, which would be nice, is that if they take on, like, some of the positive criticism and then use that to then develop the second season, and then potentially, if there's another season after that, then move from strength to strength, hopefully.
I think they need to keep that going. I think they need to, like, even if you've seen that, like, for example, where the Harfoot set, we haven't even spoken about the Harfoot set.
That's true, actually,
yeah, where the Harfoot settle down, you just need to keep saying the Shire in, like, some terrible tacky font, even though we know, just treat us like we're idiots.
And the fact then, when did the Harfoots then become hobbits?
Well, I think now, because what were those three things that were chasing the guy who's obviously Gandalf? What were those three? What were they called?
I'm not sure. They're not. They did look like kind of like wraiths, especially when he attacks them, and then they turn into skulls, and then they disappear and dissipate. But then, are we 100% that he is actually Gandalf? Because I'm 99% sure it is, because Gandalf's relationship with the hobbits. But then he still kind of just reminds me of like Saruman as well, a bit. And I was like, it could be Saruman, and that Gandalf, but then like he speaks as if the way that Gandalf would generally speaks as well.
I don't know. I think it's so obviously Gandalf, but there is a little voice in me that's like,
the same here.
Like, for example, when those three things that were chasing him, like, finally caught up with him, and like I thought, oh crap, they're just gonna kill him because I don't know, they hate him or something, and like, Sauron, we've come to worship you, and like, whoa, did not see that coming. But I already saw a spoiler on social media about Halbrand being Sauron.
Oh no!
But still, I mean, I was thinking it could be someone else. You know, because it could have actually been Sauron, because Sauron, was he he's a type of being that can take different forms.
Yeah.
So you'll see him.
He is a Valar, but he is a shape-shifting. Like, in some of the books, he can turn into like a cat, he can turn into animals, he can turn into other people as well.
Yeah.
He even like, oh no, I can't say it because it would be a
spoiler.
Yeah. But like he can turn
Spoilers.
I'll just tell you this: he can turn into like elves, humans, dwarves. And I think the clever thing with Sauron is that he's a very, very good manipulator. Like, I think even like Morgoth, if you read like some of the earlier books, Morgoth is both of them are very good manipulators. And what they do is they take someone, for example, their pride, and then work on it and be like, oh yes, you're so powerful. You're one of the greatest people, or one of the greatest smiths ever. You should build this, and this will be such a masterpiece.
Yeah.
They then build it, and then they're like, oh, what the hell have I just done now?
Exactly. He made like the one ring. Exactly. Because that's what he's trying to do with Celebrimbor.
Yeah.
Wasn't a, yeah. I know. I love that. I don't know why. It just seemed like such a dead-ass conversation. Like, why don't we try, like, when there's northern accent, why don't we try, like, putting in an alloy, like, something in with the alloy, maybe? And it's like, wow, this is like 101 smithing.
Yeah. And he's like, wait a second. How did I not know how to do that?
Yeah, exactly. The master smith of Celebrimbor.
But it could also be like elf naivety, like, no, why should we make an alloy? It should be pure. Everything should be pure, potentially, could be the reason. But
sounds a bit fascist.
True.
Damn. Wait, which one's damn? Spoilers? Nope.
I'm a Qingyu fan.
No. Damn. There we go. Got it finally. Well, I know what some buttons do now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was looking at some videos earlier, and like, you know, a lot of people online seem to have already worked out as Halbrand before, but it's funny, all the posts they put up where they say that is after it was revealed that Halbrand is Sauron, so I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But, you know, he's quite attracted to smithing. He seemed to be running away from something, so I guess him and Sauron and Adar don't get on, because I think Adar said he killed Sauron, right?
Yeah.
So I guess maybe when because I think Sauron's died a number of times, or at least his mortal form's been destroyed in Lord of the Rings, and he keeps trying to come back. So, for example, Lord of the Rings, he comes back as the Eye of Sauron.
Yeah. And like he put a lot of, I think what he does, which was very clever, but also a big mistake, is that he puts his whole essence into the ring. Mm-hmm. So technically, if his, like, for example, his mortal body ends up dying, like at the beginning of Lord of the Rings, that isn't really a spoiler. The film's been out since like 2001. So if you didn't know that, then it's almost over 20 years.
Not our problem.
So when he does get killed at the beginning of Lord of the Rings, because he's put so much of his essence into that one ring, that's how he can bring himself back from the beyond, literally, because he's poured his essence into like a living object, which is very clever. But then you then see at the end of the Return of the King, because the ring got destroyed and because he put all of his essence into the ring, he literally then died.
He's completely gone.
He's completely gone because the ring was destroyed.
Yeah.
And I think it's also clever in his way that he almost literally won if not for Gollum. Like Gollum is the hero of the whole Lord of the Rings. The fact that he bit off Frodo's finger trying to get the ring and then falling into
I know, because
Mount
Frodo was
Doom.
going to fall for the same thing what
Yeah.
Isildur fell for.
Yeah.
Like, no, I want to keep it. Yeah. I don't know. I can't wait to see, because, you know, the lore videos I'm watching, like, how Sauron gets the ring wraiths, because he gives rings, he forges his own rings and gives them to people.
Yeah, and I've like this isn't spoilers, okay, people, because this is in the beginning of Lord of the Rings, the first film. He gives like 3 rings to the elves. He gives 3, I think 5 or 7 to the dwarves, and then 7 to men.
Yeah.
The 3 rings he gives to the elves, they take them off because they know that they're evil.
Yeah.
And that they realize that he's trying to control them through the rings. The dwarfs who take them, unfortunately for Sauron, all they care about is gold. So a lot of them just collect loads and loads of gold, but then get eaten or killed by dragons, who want their gold. So the only ones he could really control with the rings he gave out was men. Yeah. And then as more they wore the rings, the more they turned into the ring wraiths. So when they died, their souls were then basically attached and tangled with Sauron. So therefore, he uses them as the ring wraiths.
Yeah, and that's what it becomes disgusting and freaky. Yeah, 'cause I remember in like the extended edition of Return of the King, when they go up to the Black Gate to finally finish off or distract, you know, Sauron whilst Frodo throws the ring in Mount Doom. The mouth of Sauron comes out to chat with them and, like, you know, talk.
Yeah.
And, like, even so, the story behind him is he was like a diplomat or something, like a normal human, but he kind of got swayed to Sauron's cause and basically became his mouth. But they wanted to. I read online the sort of thought process behind his costume. Like, he's got no lips, his teeth and mouth are enlarged. Like, he looks horrible and decayed. And it's like, just speaking the words of Sauron or speaking on Sauron's behalf is speaking evil, and that's what it does to your flesh.
Yeah.
Really cool. I like that sort of gothic darkness to Sauron.
Yeah, it's kind of like in Harry Potter, like he who must not be named, like, or I think even in some parts of Lord of the Rings, or even like high fantasy, like saying the name of the villain can also get the person to know that you're talking about them.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like that bit as well. Like they don't really throw like Sauron's name around that much, like through like the whole series. It's only really Galadriel.
Yeah, Galadriel just bangs on.
And I think the thing that gets someone else with like Galadriel is that she's like the fact that she's like, I'm not going to compromise. I'm doing this. This is my mission. But then you kind of feel like if she did compromise on certain things, she could have got help a lot quicker and maybe seen through that Hellbrand was Sauron.
Yeah, but maybe in her desperation, you know, it's not that she turned a blind eye to it, but she was just so narrowly focused on something else. And I guess she doesn't know that Sauron takes other forms. But still, it's funny how, like, there's a bit of a romance between them. She'd be like, you'd have me be a tyrant. It's like, I'd have you be queen. You know, and it's like, I was just thinking, like, what Sauerbrand says to her when she confronts him. He's like, you've given me hope that I can restore the light. And I was like, what? Is Sauron actually a good guy?
He's more of like a control freak. So like someone who believes in all, like Morgoth wants destruction, who wants everything to go to shit, basically. We'll get Jeff to out. And he wants everything to be destroyed, but Sauron wants everything to run in order. And the issue is like, if you want something to run in order, you're proudful, you always think that I'm the only one that can do it, so therefore I must be in charge, so therefore for everything to be in order and everything to work properly. And I think that's the main issue. Like, if, like, for example, if like the elves were like, you know what, Sauron, lead us, I don't think he would have really used the orcs that much. Like, if he could have persuaded, which he probably wanted to do with the rings, to control the elves and the men and also the dwarves, he wouldn't really use the orcs. But I think just because he could manipulate them again into like, the other races don't like you. I can bring you to a place where you'll be feared, where you can have a land for yourself, and you can actually be in control of something.
But Adar stole that from him, so maybe that's why the orcs didn't give a crap that Adar killed Sauron, their former leader, because I guess Sauron must have treated them like crap, and then Adar was like showing them love, and now he's giving them Mordor. But I'd be interested to see, actually. Well, what do you think is going to happen in season 2?
I'm not sure actually, because like, are they going to really focus like on the books? But I know what's going to happen.
Which books?
I can't even say the
Silmarillion?
books. Yeah, the Silmarillions. Yes, I think they could focus on those books, and I think what will probably happen is that Sauron will basically exert his dominance over Mordor.
I think him and Adar are going to have a showdown, and I'm pretty certain he's going to come out on top. That's if Adar actually knows that Sauron can change form, because, well, I mean, it looked like in the final episode that, you know, how Sauerbrand had gone to Mordor in his human form, so Adar might not necessarily even know, to be honest, and Sauerbrand might go ahead and like work his way around.
And another thing that people might not know, or some people might not know, is that Sauron is actually a Valar. He's not a mortal being.
Right.
Like, for example, like I was just reading some of the stuff about Morgoth. Like, he would trick people by pretending to be someone else, and then they wouldn't know that he is actually a Maiar who has all this power. And I think maybe that's another thing, that they don't know that Sauron isn't actually human.
Yeah. I'd be keen to see how that comes across, because I wonder if he'll present himself as a god to the orcs.
Like, like, how does he get the orcs buy-in? And also, like, the fact that Isildur is an actual, no spoilers here, is a major, because if you've watched Lord of the Rings, you'll know that Isildur is a major person within the Lord of the Rings the film, especially at the beginning of the film. So the question I'm asking is it the same Isildur?
Yeah, but
and if it is, like, wasn't Isildur's father a king?
Exactly. Well, Ellen, his father was there actually in Fellowship of the Ring, and that.
Yeah. So then,
but when was that battle? Was that the Second Age or the Third Age?
Yeah, that's another key thing. Like,
how? Because I know some humans in Lord of the Rings can live longer. Like Aragorn was blessed with.
Oh yeah, because he has. I think he's got elven blood. I think that's why he could. Really? Okay. That's why he could live for quite some time. But yeah, it's like, is Isildur the same Isildur that's going to be in Lord of the Rings at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, and is he the one that defeats Sauron? Because if so, then how is that going to work? Because we mentioned his father was technically king, and then his descendant is actually Aragorn as well.
Yeah.
And the question is like, how are they going to really work that into the show? Because like, if they then most likely then we'll probably see in season 2 the destruction of like Numenor, possibly then. Because like,
spoilers,
like what could cause them to leave there to then for him to be king, and then for them to be in Middle Earth and not be in Numenor.
I know exactly which bit of lore you're talking about, and I kind of want to talk about it. I know it's going to be a big spoiler. I
know.
But basically that, you know, Sauron is going to somehow wean his way into Numenorean society, and Numenor will become corrupt and start worshipping, was it Melkor, like a dark god or something, and basically that'll eventually lead to the doom of Numenor, and I guess the founding of Gondor somehow. I can't remember if that was in it, but you know, that'd be cool to see that happen, because Numenor just seems like its own happy place. But I'd love to see how, you know, a Sauron and actually his evil form. I wonder if he'd still be in the Halbrand form, because I guess the whole Sauron character, you never see what he looked like without all that armor on. I assume he's just welded to it or something. But they need to give him a human face to make him
and like
actable, I guess.
Yeah, and I think like because he has many forms, are we going to see some of his other forms? Like he does
the cat form of Sauron, the most like pathetic form.
Well, potentially, yeah. And I think he was like a giant cat as well. Yeah, which is weird and funny. And I think it's kind of like, I don't know why, for me, like, there's a similarity between like Sauron and like evil Loki.
Yeah, there's a lot of mischief, isn't there?
And like a lot of like manipulation, shape changing. And I think like he changes into an elf and then spoilers here, please. This is the spoiler section. He helps like he gets like what's his Celebrimbor to help work with him to create the One Ring.
But even was Celebrimbor aware that was Sauron?
I don't know, not at all.
Oh,
he
dear.
didn't realize it was Sauron at all. And I think that could happen in season 2. Like, will he make the so we do see that there's 3 rings for the elves. Will we see him make his rings? And will we see him in his many forms manipulating behind the scenes? Because literally, he could be spending the whole next season manipulating the dwarves, manipulating the elves, manipulating the men of Numenor, the men of...
Or maybe like you see the people who eventually become the ring wraiths
Yeah.
come along as well. I feel like so they need to bleed them in. Like the Witch King would be a good start as well. I'd like to see Angmar and where they come from. Yeah, that would be cool. Because I feel like they'll certainly be giving lots of shout outs to Lord of the Rings and the characters in it, and slowly work their way along. Yeah, I've got to admit, I can't wait. I don't know when the release date will be, but I think I'm hopeful for it. If it's of the same quality as this series has been, I'll still watch it. If it's better, hell yeah, I'll definitely watch it. I mean, overall, what would you say you'd give Lord Rings of Power season 1 out of 10?
Out of 10, so I'll do like the whole IMDb style. So I'll give like decimal points. I would say 7.1.
7 point. Oh, how generous! The 0.1. You are a generous guy.
Because I would say that there's. I think if a show for me like has potential, and like even if it starts slow, if there's like what you've said, certain like inconsistencies, like if the acting isn't sometimes as high as in other scenes as well, but there's like something that they can work on into season 2. And also, we've mentioned like the soundtrack's really good. The setting of the show, the graphics of the show is good. It is a watchable TV show. It's not like one of the worst fantasy shows you'll see on TV.
It's not a piece of crap, that's for sure.
And it's like, you also, if it can give you like moments of like, wow, and it can surprise you, you can't really give it like an average score. Like something can't be average if it can like astound you or excite you.
Yeah.
But then, so that's why I give it like a 7.1, because I can't really give it like a 6 just because it's like it
too
does
mean.
It'd be too mean, and like and it kind of does elevate itself at like the last 3 episodes does elevate the season a bit, and so I would say like a 7.1.
Yeah, I would give it. I think I'd give it a 7. I'm not gonna be generous and give it a 0.1 because I thought it was, as you say, it was entertaining. It was beautiful to watch.
Yeah,
soundtrack had me going. Costume design really cool.
Yeah.
Orcs amazing. Some cool characters in it. But then I think it was let down by, quite frankly, some inconsistent acting. Just general like sometimes bad dialogue. And it just felt less polished compared to things like House of the Dragon. And speaking about the acting, for example, one thing I want to point out with Lord of the Rings is, people who play elves in it, because I know elves have to come across as quite like emotionally like distant, like Legolas was like that, and Hot Elf in this was like it. But sometimes I just couldn't tell if they were being emotionally distant or just a bad actor.
Yeah.
And not all the elves come across as emotionally distant. Galadriel seems very emotional in this. Gil-galad as well. Maybe he seems distant. I don't know. Elrond, it's a bit hard to say. But I think for atmosphere, they got it good with this. Yeah. It's just the detail was a bit unrefined, and considering the budget, come on, $400 million. It's more than double the next most expensive show. Like, where that all gone?
And I think like another issue that I kind of have is like we didn't even mention much in our breakdown like of the halflings at all, the half-wits. And I think the issue is that the way the show is made out, because so many things are happening at different places, you sometimes forget that oh yeah, we haven't seen the Harfords for this whole episode, or wait, we haven't seen the dwarfs for this episode, or we haven't seen Hellbrand for this for this amount of part of the episode, and you're kind of like thinking to yourself that, especially like in the middle of the season where you don't see the Harfords at all, it's like, are they then really that needed as a part of the story? If like you can like have like an almost like a whole 2 episodes where they're not included in it almost at all.
I think it's going to be like the Shire and Lord of the Rings, like
yeah. And it kind of feels like, but the thing is, like Lord of the Rings, it kind of felt that everything was connected, working towards the same good. And I think the really thing I did like about the way that Peter Jackson did it was that all of them come together in Fellowship of the Ring. They all separate for the next film, but you all see their progression on how they want to end the threat of Sauron. But then in this one, it's kind of like
they've all come from separate things, and
they're all heading different directions. And then you start to see like similar directions for like the Southlands and also the Númenóreans and Galadriel. And then you kind of see how like the Harfoot storyline does then also link to the larger storyline of like who is Sauron? Sauron is returning. Who is the potential Sauron? But you don't really see how that what their journey, how that really affects the storyline.
Yeah,
because like you could literally have like the person we believe is Gandalf crash in, not meet the Harfoots at all, wander the wilderness, meet a few people, and then be chased by those wraith things at the end, and then it still would tell the story without the Harfoots. And it's like they could have really utilized them a bit more and like built how their story is also linked to the larger Lord of the Rings universe, but and also linked to the situation with Sauron, because it kind of felt like their specific story was completely separate from everybody else's.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't feel like, but then I think thinking about the Shire and Lord of the Rings, I mean, I don't know why the Shire was basically only in Fellowship of the Ring, but yeah, it's so much more memorable. Everyone loves Shire. The theme, the soundtrack to it and stuff. The Harfoots one, don't know, it was less so catchy, but I guess because the Harfoots want to move, so it's just more about the nature. I still think the design for them is really cool, how they really integrated to nature, like their fashion is basically camouflage as well, like it blends in. I thought that there's some really good like effort put into Harfoots, but I don't know why, I like, for example, me and you almost forgot to talk about them.
Yeah, and
like,
I think
they just kind of blend away for some reason.
Yeah,
but I still quite like them.
And I like them myself, and I think they're a really key point of the TV series.
Lenny Henry was
and
great.
a really high point of the TV series, like learning about their culture, learning about them, and they all like even like some like the darker moments of the series. They then did bring like
a bit of light,
a bit of light to it, and also a bit of comedy to it as well. And I think that they could have done more with them. And like shown more how much that like how important they are still to the storyline, but as you said, it still did feel like some kind of like cutoff that we almost like fully went on mentioning all the big things that happened in the series, but barely mentioned the Harfoots at all.
Yeah, that's true. I need to think about that. Why I just almost forgot about them, because like there's one really good scene where one of the Harfoots is singing, like that song they're singing is just beautiful, and that almost captured the essence of Lord of the Rings for me quite well, like that kind of Shire feel. I'll come back to you on that one. Yeah, it was good. Any final thoughts?
I would say one of my final thoughts is that I just hope that they just take what they've done, work on it, and make it better, expand on those different storylines, like is like what we've mentioned from the books, what we've mentioned of what possibly could happen. They could build up so many different storylines that could really make the show like season 2 epic. Like for example, if you see the manipulation of Sauron between all of the 3 races, the dwarfs, the men, and also the elves as well. And then that could then play into like the whole thing with the Harfoots, which we believe will then become the Hobbits. The fact that Sauron has never really been able to manipulate them or been really involved with them. So that's why the rings really didn't corrupt Bilbo at first, or really corrupt Frodo until the last bit. And if you think about it, even Gollum, who was a Hobbit, he basically didn't really get that much corrupted. He just really cared about himself and the ring. He he didn't think about power. He didn't think about
he
money
just
or
wanted
riches.
to keep the ring.
Yeah.
My precious.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe they are the lightest creatures in it, the hobbits, because they just want to party and keep to their own.
Yeah.
You know, they've got lovely gardens and stuff. Feels like they're like the well-being gurus of the Rings of Power universe. Well, folks, that is all we have time for today on this Rings of Power special. I hope we spoke about everything Rings of Power and we gave it a very fair review.
Yes, we did.
I think we did. I didn't stick the dagger in too deep there. And, you know, we've spoken about it before on previous two Maesters episodes, but I think we've done it justice. Have you?
Yeah.
Good.
We have.
And they say there's no justice in this world. Well, that's just not true. But yeah, we're going to have to say goodbye now, but I would like to say that, you know, the next few episodes we're going to be doing on the Two Maesters podcast will be looking into other series and universes. We'll be doing it in special form, just like this. So we'd like to do The Witcher, Dune, Star Wars. I feel like Star Wars, we're going to need a good 2 episodes for that.
Possibly 3, because like you could talk about the animated shows, you could talk about the new TV shows, you could talk about the films.
Yeah, exactly. There's treasure troves there, and also a lot to rant about. You know us, we like our ranting. And, you know, again, special thanks to our Dark Lord and Master of Creation and Master of the Rings, Jeffrey. What would we do without you, buddy? From the Pick Up the Mic Network, our Lord and Savior. And, you know, if you want to hear more from us, please click the notification button so you can hear when we release a new episode. And leave a like or comment. We will promise not to send anything nasty back, although it depends what mood I'm in. And if you would like to donate to our channel and to the Pick Up the Mic Network, that'd be fantastic. Please find us on our Patreon page. Well, I've done enough plugging, so I will leave you there, my wonderful audience. Josh, any last words?
Hopefully we saw all of you again for the next season of Rings of Power as well, and also the next season also for House of the Dragon, which hopefully is next year. They don't do a whole year hiatus that they did for Game of Thrones the last season. So hopefully we can see all of you again for another, hopefully a wonderful season for both those 2 series.
Excellent. We're looking forward to it, boss. Ciao for now. Bye, everyone.